Critter health is a function of habitat health. And when we're talking habitat for deer and turkey throughout much of the ranges, that involves timber stand improvement or logging. Logging can be messy, but I want to talk about 3 things that I commonly see go wrong with logging operations and how landowners can avoid them. The most common mistake Daniel and I see working all through the USA is landowners naively hiring the wrong logger or forester. Doesn't mean those loggers or foresters don't have skills, but they're in the mode to do timber harvest for profit. We all want to make a profit, but if you own land for hunting or habitat values, then you want a forester or logger that understands and can incorporate that wildlife value into the logging operation. That may mean thinning more, thinning less, leaving different species, but you want to make sure the logger is keyed in to the objectives of the landowner. Maybe to make this easier to understand, there's a sliding scale or a continuum, and on this side, we call those timber beasts. All they care about, or the landowner cares about, a landowner can be a timber beast, is maximizing the value of the timber on the property, either harvested now or future harvest. And on this side, well, that's where I am, I'm worried about maximizing wildlife habitat value. You need to figure out where you are on that continuum and very clearly communicate it to the logger. And by the way, before you do any logging operations, you want a written contract that's signed by both parties, the landowner and the logger, not a big legal rascal, something that clearly says this is what you're going to do, this is the time frame, this is how we handle rain days, if you tear up my roads, you got to fix them. You want a clear and concise contract so we know what's expected by both parties. A lot of people that have recreational land or land for hunting, they're not from a forestry background, they've never done logging before, and they may not have a contact with a good logger. One of the best ways I found to evaluate loggers in that new situation is go look at their logging jobs, not just 6 months ago, but 2 years, 5 years ago. Tell them your objectives and ask them that you want to see a similar operation, a similar logging job where the landowner had similar objectives. That will tell you if they can deliver what you're looking for. Foresters tend to make the plans and kind of ride herd on the loggers. Loggers actually remove the wood. Foresters are usually certified depending on the state. They have to have certain tests and credentials. And foresters tend to charge about 10%. So if the logger removes $100,000 off your property, the forester is going to take 10% of that for arranging and getting the log in there and kind of checking on them and riding herd. You need to understand this game before you start playing it. Second most common mistake Daniel and I see throughout the Whitetails range is we get there and they've already had a logger in there thinking, boy, we did great, but they had what we call tree hugger syndrome. They just couldn't stand to kill too many trees, and there's not enough sun coming down to the ground to stimulate those grasses and forbs. Not thinning hard enough. A really good common recommendation for thinning for wildlife purposes, you're pretty far on that continuum towards the wildlife habitat side, is 60 basal feet per acre. And that simply means you would have 60 trees per acre that had a diameter of 1 foot at 4.5 feet tall, or what we call breast height, or 126-inch trees, or 32-foot trees. And the magic to that is you could have more small trees or fewer big trees, but the crowns are going to allow about 50% or so of the sun's energy to reach the ground and stimulate that good growth. Again, there's a difference between maximizing future timber harvest potential and maximizing wildlife habitat potential. Sometimes they overlap, depending on the tree species and where you're working. Sometimes they can be vastly different. And then thin the appropriate trees. Too often we see where loggers take the very best trees for wildlife, because they're high value trees like white oaks or something, and leave the rest. That's high grading. You don't want to be in a high grading situation. Wildlife, recreational landowners, whatever, we want to leave the best trees and thin out the lower quality trees. Loggers don't like that because lower quality trees don't bring them as much money at the mill. They could do the same amount of work per day or week, but not make as much money. And that all is in the consideration when negotiating the price and the return to the landowner and the return to the forester and logger. Please, 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 and I see this all throughout America, especially in hardwood forests. Don't accept the, oh, well, we're only gonna take trees that are 14 inches or larger or 16 inches or larger. That's often the best big oaks out there. That's high grading. You're taking the very best trees and leaving the understory, which could be elms or maples or whatever, smaller crooked oaks that we're trying to grow through a closed canopy forest. That's called a DBH cut. We're cutting everything a certain size and larger. When you think about that, unless there's a disease or something, you're definitely high grading. You're taking the best and leaving the rest, which decreases the value of that property.
Growing Deer is brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's. Also by Green Cover Food Plots, Winchester, PH Outdoors, Black Widow Bows, Moultrie Mobile, Steel, Fleet Outdoor Apparel, Morel Targets, Fourth Arrow, Soil Pro Outdoors, Scorpion Venom Archery, Case IH Tractors, Burris Optics, and Redneck Hunting Blinds.
The third mistake Daniel and I commonly see, and this one's really painful, it's difficult and can be expensive to correct, is no follow-up plan. When you do logging, which means you're removing trees, you're putting more sun to the ground, something's going to grow. Something's going to fill that vacuum. That sun's energy is going to stimulate some growth. And for example, if you're in the South, maybe in pine woods or whatever, and you thin it, and you don't do any follow-up, I almost promise you that's going to fill up with sweet gum trees. The hated sweet gum tree. It has almost no value for wildlife, and certainly not the financial value of some other species for future timber harvest. You've seen this driving down the road anywhere in the South. You drive by a pine stand, the tops are up here, but there's this wall down here of just solid sweet gum, low quality hardwood, sweet gums, elms, whatever. Don't do that. Current prices, it's about $100, $120 an acre to apply a herbicide over pines, usually an imazapyr-based herbicide, to control those low-quality, undesirable hardwoods, and then you can get grasses and forbs in there. Or you're following up with a lot of prescribed fire. Whatever it is, no follow-up plan, leaving it just to whatever grows, grows, almost never works out to the benefit of the landowner. Another situation is they do a thinning in hardwoods or pines, and all of a sudden you got a blue million volunteer trees coming up. Folks, stump sprouts can be fairly nutritious because you got a 20, 30, 40-year-old root system feeding that young sprout and they browse on it. But volunteer seedlings don't have that big root system, and they're not very nutritious. And I don't know about you, but I don't want my deer eating wooden toothpicks and trying to grow big antlers. That does not work out well. A follow-up plan that manages towards forbs. Forbs are what drive deer herds, folks. Broadleaf, what you might call weeds, grasses and forbs, cover and food is what we want included in that habitat. But if we just leave that willy-nilly, that almost never happens. Another part of that follow-up plan, if there's heavy slash everywhere, maybe hardwood tops or pine tops, or you felled a bunch of cedars, whatever that is, can you then do a safe prescribed fire and not hurt the trees you left standing? How is that slash being managed? So at our place, we do what we call slashing the slash. We cut those up to 4 or 5 foot lengths, get them closer to the ground. So when we do a fire through there, we get pretty decent consumption, but it's not a major rage or scarring or killing all the residual trees we want to leave. Yes, that costs a little bit extra, or my guys have to work a little bit harder, but the end goal is what I'm focused on, premium wildlife habitat. And if you work to leave big white oaks or whatever it is, and then you scar them 30 feet tall because the fire's too hot, you did not meet your final objectives. Logging is a tremendous tool to improve wildlife habitat. It's more than that, it's a necessary tool on a vast majority of recreationally owned properties. Done appropriately, it's one of the best tools we can use to improve habitat. Done inappropriately, it can really set that property back. You spend a lot of money and you've actually decreased the value and the hunting quality on that property. If you're not used to logging, I hope you get someone to help you define that plan. Remember some key points before you hire a logger and or a forester. Go look at their work 2, 3, 4 years later. Logging jobs don't look too bad 1 month afterwards. Go look at what it looks like 5 years later. Is that full of sweet gums? Did they kill all the trees? They died 2 years later because they scarred them all up with the big equipment, whatever. Have a plan. Figure out how much sunshine you want to put to the ground, how many trees you want to leave, and then have an even follow-up plan for 2 or 3, 4 years later. How are you controlling and managing to get the vegetation you want versus a bunch of low-quality hardwood trees or a blue million pine saplings coming up in that area? I'd rather have a low-quality closed canopy forest that I can still work on than to have a really bad logging job that's going to take decades to turn it around. If you got questions, Daniel and I help landowners all throughout the United States. There's a fee for our services. Give us a call if you're getting ready to do a big logging job. We'll be happy to try to help you out. Big logging jobs don't fit every property, and it's not for everyone. I really enjoy doing habitat work myself, and we've shared several shows and videos about using hack and squirt. One guy in a hatchet and squirt bottle can cover a lot of ground. Chainsaw work. We'll put those in the description, and you can do this yourself depending on the scale and the hurry you're in. Well-managed forests are a beautiful picture of creation, but I enjoy doing that work to get them there or maintain them and being part of that creation. But more important than understanding forestry and its role in wildlife habitat is to understand the Creator's will for our life, make sure we're tuned up and seeking His will daily. Thanks for watching Growing Deer.